While purchasing a necklace for his wife, the sight of the saleswoman's pendant stopped the millionaire in his tracks. It was the exact same one he had gifted his daughter before she vanished 18 years ago. Jason Caldwell stood frozen at the threshold of a room he had avoided for years. The air was thick with dust, and the sunlight seeping through the heavy curtains cast a dim glow over the worn wallpaper. It was Lily's room, left exactly as it had been since the day she disappeared. Her beloved stuffed animals were still lined up on the bed, and a framed picture of her cheerful face rested on the nightstand. She had only been 8, full of innocence and boundless energy. Jason's heart clenched. He had tried so hard to keep everything intact, to survive the unbearable weight of each year that passed. But the truth was undeniable: a part of him had died the moment she was taken. He could still hear her laughter, the patter of her small feet running through the house. Now, all that remained was a profound silence that echoed through every room in the mansion. Isabel would have known what to do. His first wife had always been the rock, the one who held their lives together when things fell apart. But she was gone too, lost during childbirth when Lily came into the world. The cruel irony of it all: Isabel had sacrificed her life to bring Lily into his, only for the world to snatch Lily away years later. Jason stepped further into the room, his fingers brushing over the dust-coated dresser. Lily's schoolbooks were still stacked neatly, as if she might walk through the door at any moment to finish her homework. It was a naive hope, but one he could never completely let go of. For nearly 2 decades, Jason had clung to the belief that Lily was somewhere, still alive, waiting to be found. He had spared no expense in searching for her, hiring private investigators, making public pleas, working with the authorities, but every lead had dried up, leaving him with nothing but the faint flicker of hope and a heart filled with regret. After Isabel's death, Jason had buried himself in his work, building his business empire, closing deals, expanding his fortune. It was his way of numbing the pain, keeping his mind off the gaping wound in his life. Then Catherine had entered his world. She was lovely, warm, and full of life. For a brief time, she had made him feel alive again. When they married, Jason thought it was a chance to start fresh, to build a new life. But happiness was fleeting. Even with Catherine by his side, there was always a shadow looming between them: the unsolved mystery of Lily's fate. The agonizing question of why they had never found her. In the beginning, Catherine had offered him comfort. But as the years dragged on, the search for Lily weighed heavily on their marriage. Slowly, Catherine began to pull away, the unspoken strain widening the gap between them with every fruitless lead and false hope. Turning his back on the room, Jason walked out slowly, shutting the door behind him as if trying to close off the past. He couldn't live like this forever, he had to find a way to move forward. Yet, every time he considered letting go of the search, something deep within him wouldn't allow it. Today was Catherine's birthday, and Jason had promised to take her shopping. It was a small distraction from the grief that had become a constant in their lives. They were headed to Manhattan, and while Jason felt little enthusiasm for the trip, he knew Catherine thrived in the buzz of the city's luxury and excitement. He had even planned to surprise her with a special gift, perhaps a stunning piece of jewelry. It seemed the least he could do for the woman who had endured so much by his side, even if the warmth between them had long since faded. With one last glance at Lily's untouched room, Jason pulled the door closed, leaving the past behind once again. He would always carry her memory with him, the pain of losing her woven into every part of who he was. But life moved on, even when you weren't ready. Jason made his way downstairs, where Catherine waited by the door, looking as radiant as ever. Her face brightened when she saw him. "Ready to go?" she asked with a smile, though Jason detected the slightest hint of impatience in her tone. He nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, let's head out." They drove in silence for most of the trip. Catherine made light conversation about a dinner party they were expected to attend later in the week, but Jason's thoughts were elsewhere. He was back in Lily's room, standing over her bed, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. When they finally reached the city, Catherine's excitement was contagious. She loved New York, the fast-paced streets, the designer boutiques, the energy that buzzed with endless possibilities. Jason, however, had always found it a bit overwhelming. But today wasn't about him. He had one goal: to find the perfect gift for her. They wandered down Fifth Avenue, Catherine darting in and out of shops, trying on dresses and shoes. Jason trailed behind, his mind still drifting back to Lily. His eyes scanned the crowds, almost unconsciously, as if he might spot her among the throngs of people, even though he knew it was a foolish hope. After what felt like hours, Catherine stopped in front of a jewelry store. "I think I'll have a look in here," she said, her eyes gleaming as she admired the glittering gems in the window. Jason nodded, following her inside. The store was elegant, with gleaming counters and soft lighting that gave everything a luxurious glow. It was the kind of place where a single piece of jewelry could rival the cost of a car. Jason had never cared much for extravagance, but Catherine adored it, and that was what mattered. As they stepped inside, something unexpected caught his attention. Behind the counter, a young saleswoman was assisting a customer, a delicate pendant resting around her neck. Jason's heart stopped. It was the exact same pendant he had given to Lily just days before she disappeared. Everything around him seemed to slow to a crawl. His gaze was locked on the small emerald pendant, suspended by a thin chain. Just like the one he had clasped around Lily's neck all those years ago. He could still see her face light up, her tiny hands reaching to touch the cool metal, her smile beaming. "Jason?" Catherine's voice pulled him back to reality. She was standing next to him, holding up a pair of diamond earrings. "What do you think of these?" she asked, but he barely registered her words. Yeah. They're nice," he muttered, his focus still glued to the saleswoman. His heart raced, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Could this really be a coincidence? There had to be hundreds of pendants like that out there. But something about the way it shimmered in the soft store lighting sent a flood of emotions surging through him. "I'll be right back," Jason mumbled, already walking toward the counter. He heard Catherine call after him, but the sound faded as he approached the young woman. She finished helping her customer, and Jason stood there, his throat dry, his palms sweating. Up close, he could see her face more clearly. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, her eyes, her jawline, but he couldn't quite place it. His mind raced, torn between hope and fear. At last, she turned to him, a professional smile on her lips. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and polite, though there was a softness in her tone that took him by surprise. Jason hesitated, unsure of how to begin. His gaze flicked to the pendant once more. "That necklace," he began, his voice unsteady. "Where did you get it?" The saleswoman glanced down at the pendant as if noticing it for the first time. Her fingers gently grazed the emerald. "Oh, this? It was a gift from my mother," she said, her expression softening as she spoke. Jason felt his breath catch. "Your mother?" he asked, trying to keep his voice level. She nodded. "Yes, it's one of the only things I have from her. She gave it to me when I was little." "Why do you ask?" Jason's pulse pounded in his ears. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain? How could he even begin to ask the questions swirling in his mind without sounding completely unhinged? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I knew someone who had a necklace just like that," he said, carefully choosing his words. "It's very rare." The young woman smiled gently. Though there was a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion, maybe Lily nodded. "Yeah, I've never seen another one like it. My mom always told me it was special. It's the only piece of jewelry I wear." Jason's chest tightened. He needed to know more, but he couldn't just ask if she was Emily, if this young woman, after all these years, could be his daughter. The thought seemed impossible, yet he couldn't shake it. "What's your name?" he asked, attempting to sound casual, though his heart was racing. "Lily," she replied. "Lily Matthews." Lily, not Emily. Jason swallowed hard, his initial surge of hope dimmed by the name. But names could be changed, he reminded himself. That thought began to root itself deeper in his mind. Lily Matthews, he repeated softly. It's a lovely name. He forced a smile, though his mind was working furiously. Who was she? Why did she have Emily's necklace? Before he could ask another question, Catherine appeared at his side, her eyes shifting between him and Lily, a curious expression on her face. Jason, what are you doing? She asked, a slight edge to her voice. Did you find something you like? Jason blinked, momentarily startled. No, not yet, he stammered, still trying to keep his focus on Lily. I was just asking the young lady about her necklace. Catherine chuckled lightly, clearly puzzled by his sudden interest in jewelry. You're really getting into this, huh? She said with a smile before turning to Lily. He's not usually the type to care about necklaces. Lily smiled back, though Jason could sense her unease growing. The moment was slipping away, and he still didn't have the answers he so desperately sought. Do you work here every day? Jason asked, his voice tight, as if he were grasping at a lifeline. I mean, in case I want to come back. For the necklace. Lily's brow furrowed slightly, and she glanced between him and Catherine. Yeah, I'm here most days, she answered slowly, her voice now cautious, as though she could sense something deeper behind his questions. Even if she didn't understand it. Jason nodded, forcing himself to step back, realizing he couldn't push too hard, not yet. He had to approach this carefully, but the need to know more gnawed at him. We'll be back, he murmured, almost more to himself than to anyone else. He barely noticed Catherine's amused look as they left the store. His mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions. The pendant, Lily. There was no way this was a coincidence. As they walked back down Fifth Avenue, Catherine chatted about the earrings she had her eye on, but Jason was miles away. His thoughts spiraled with wild possibilities, each one more improbable than the last. Could it be her? Could this woman really be the daughter he had lost all those years ago? The very thought consumed him, pulling him deeper into a whirlpool of hope, fear, and disbelief. He needed to know more about Lily Matthews. He needed to know if she could truly be Emily. And he wasn't going to stop until he found out the truth. The drive home from the city was a blur. Catherine talked on, her voice drifting in the background, but Jason barely registered a word. All he could see was the image of Lily in the jewelry store. The way her fingers had instinctively touched the pendant, the same pendant he had placed around Emily's neck so many years ago. Could it really be her? Could his daughter, who had disappeared without a trace, have been standing right in front of him? By the time they pulled into the driveway, Jason had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let this rest. The answers were too close. He could feel it. He had to know who Lily really was and how she came to possess that necklace. Later that evening, after Catherine had gone to bed, Jason sat alone in his office, staring at the family photos that adorned his desk. His eyes lingered on one of him and Elizabeth on their wedding day, arms wrapped around each other, smiling. Then his gaze fell on the last school photo of Emily, her gap-toothed grin beaming with innocence. He had spent years searching for her. At first, the police had been optimistic, convinced she had been taken by someone nearby, perhaps a neighbor or a family friend. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched into months, the trail went cold. After a year, the authorities all but gave up. But Jason never did. He had poured a fortune into the search, hiring private investigators, following every lead, no matter how faint. But in the end, nothing. Emily was gone, and with her, a part of Jason's soul had vanished too. Now, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, there was a glimmer of hope. And with that hope came a determination he hadn't felt in years. He would find out who Lily Matthews truly was. And if she was Emily, nothing was going to stop him from bringing her home. Hope brought with it the need for action. Michael grabbed the phone and called an old contact, Paul Mitchell, a private investigator he had relied on in the past. Paul was known for being discreet, thorough, and relentless. If anyone could uncover the truth about Lily Matthews, it was him. The phone rang twice before Paul picked up, his voice as gravelly as Michael remembered. "Michael Reynolds. It's been a long time." "Too long," Michael replied, his voice tense but steady. "I need your help again, Paul." "It's about Emily." There was a pause on the other end. "I thought we'd exhausted every lead." Michael's words tumbled out. "I found someone, a young woman. She has the same pendant I gave Emily before she disappeared. I think she might be my daughter." The silence stretched for a moment before Paul spoke again, softer this time. "Michael, I'm going to need more than a pendant. People move on. Jewelry changes hands. You know that." "I know," Michael said, his voice quick, almost pleading. "But it's not just the necklace. She looks familiar, Paul. There's something about her I can't explain. I need you to dig into this. Find out who she really is." Paul sighed. "Send me what you've got. I'll see what I can do." Michael hung up and leaned back in his chair, his heart racing. He had done everything he could for now. The rest was in Paul's hands. The following days blurred together as he tried to focus on his business, but his mind kept wandering back to Lily. Every time his phone rang, his pulse jumped, hoping it was Paul with answers. Samantha noticed, of course. She wasn't oblivious, but Michael kept his distance, not ready to share what he had found. Not yet. A week later, Paul called. "I've got something," he said, his voice serious. Michael's stomach clenched. "What did you find?" "Lily Matthews isn't who she thinks she is," Paul began. "According to the records, she was found abandoned when she was about 7 years old, just outside a small town upstate. No one knew where she came from, and there were no missing persons reports that matched her description in the area. The couple who found her ended up adopting her, gave her a new name, and raised her as their own." Michael's breath caught. 7 years old. That's right. She didn't remember anything before they found her. And there's more. I found a photo of her when she was first taken in. Michael, it's her. It's Emily. The world tilted. Michael gripped the edge of his desk to keep steady. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Paul said. "The pendant, her age, the timeline, it all matches. I'm sending you the photo now." Michael's phone buzzed. He opened the message, and the image on the screen hit him like a tidal wave. It was Emily. Her hair was shorter, and she looked smaller, more fragile, but it was undeniably her. Tears filled his eyes as the weight of the discovery sank in. After all these years, after all the searching, Emily had been alive. Hidden in plain sight, raised by another family, with no memory of the life she had lost. But as the initial wave of emotion passed, another question rose in his mind, gnawing at him. How had this happened? How had Emily ended up abandoned, alone on a roadside, with no memory of her past? And why hadn't he been able to find her all this time? Michael wiped his eyes, his mind spinning with unanswered questions. One thought, one suspicion, kept creeping in, one he couldn't ignore: Samantha. Could she have known? Could she have been involved in some way? It felt impossible. Samantha had been his support through the darkest days after Emily disappeared. She had urged him not to give up, had stood by him when hope seemed lost. But now, with this new revelation, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there might be more to the story, more than he understood. He had to confront her. He had to find out the truth. Michael sat at his desk, staring at the photo Paul had sent him, his hands trembling slightly. 18 years of searching, of hoping, and now the truth was right in front of him. Emily was alive. But how had she ended up in that small town, abandoned and alone, with no memory of the family who had loved her? And why hadn't he been able to save her? Couldn't bear the thought of losing you. I was terrified you'd always see me as second to Elizabeth and Emily. I thought I could make things better, for both of us. Michael shook his head, his chest tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. You didn't make anything better. You destroyed everything. Samantha sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands, but Michael could feel no sympathy for her now. His world had been shattered, not once but twice, first when Emily disappeared and now again, learning the truth. The woman he had relied on for comfort, who had shared his life, was the very one responsible for tearing it apart. He felt the enormity of the betrayal sink deeper into his bones. "You thought I'd be happier without my own daughter? You thought taking her away would make me love you more?" Samantha's words came out in broken sobs. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I didn't realize what it would do to you. I just wanted us to have a life without the constant pain." Michael paced the room, unable to stand still as the weight of her confession pressed down on him. "You thought you could erase my past, my love for my own child? How could you have been so cruel, so selfish?" Samantha trembled, her voice barely a whisper now. "I didn't mean for it to go so far," she repeated, her words hollow. Michael stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes cold. "You didn't mean for it to go so far? You had her taken away. You ripped her from her home, from me. You didn't just break my heart, Samantha, you destroyed my family." She looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation, but he could see no remorse strong enough to mend what had been broken. The silence between them was deafening, the gravity of her actions suffocating any chance of reconciliation. There was no fixing this. The woman he thought he knew had become a stranger, her deception unraveling everything they had shared. Michael's voice shook as he asked the one question that remained, the question that now consumed him. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where did you send Emily?" Samantha hesitated, wiping her tears as her eyes flickered with fear. I didn't know she'd end up abandoned. I didn't mean for that to happen, I swear. I arranged for someone to take her away, far from here, but something must have gone wrong. I never wanted her to be left on her own." Michael felt sick. So many years had been stolen from him, from Emily, because of Samantha's twisted jealousy. His fists clenched at his sides, and he fought to keep his voice steady. "You played with our lives, and for what? So you could have me all to yourself?" He stared at her, disgusted. "You've ruined everything." Samantha tried to speak, but her words were lost in her sobs. Michael couldn't look at her anymore. He turned away, needing to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. "I can't even look at you," he muttered, his voice hollow. "I don't know what happens next, but I will find Emily. I will get my daughter back, with or without you in my life." He walked out of the room, leaving Samantha sobbing behind him. As he stepped into the night, the cool air hit his face, but it did little to numb the anguish surging through him. Michael knew one thing for certain: he had to find Emily, no matter what it took. There were still so many questions left unanswered, but now he had a new purpose. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, the chance to bring his daughter back into his life. "Made a mistake. My parents adopted me when I was a little girl. I don't know who Emily Reynolds is." Michael's heart sank. He had expected disbelief, even denial, but the sharp rejection in her voice stung more than he could have imagined. His pulse quickened, but he couldn't stop now. He had to explain. He had to make her see. "I know this is hard to believe, but please, just hear me out," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You were taken when you were 7 years old. You didn't remember your life before that. Your name was changed to Lily, but you're my daughter. I gave you that pendant, the one you wear now, right before you disappeared. It's the same one." Lily's eyes widened, and she instinctively touched the pendant around her neck. Her hand trembled slightly, but she still shook her head in disbelief. "No, this can't be true. I don't remember anything before I was found by my parents. They told me I was abandoned. That no one knew where I came from." "They wouldn't lie to me," she said, her voice wavering as she spoke, but the uncertainty was creeping in. Michael stepped closer, desperate to bridge the gap between them. "They didn't know," he said softly. "I've been searching for you for 18 years, Emily. I never gave up. I've spent every day wondering where you were, hoping you were still out there. And now, here you are. I'm your father." Lily, or Emily, stared at him, her breath shallow, her eyes glistening with confusion and fear. She took another step back, her hands gripping the counter as if to ground herself. "But my life. My parents. They're my family." "I don't know you," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. Michael felt his heart break all over again. He had imagined this moment for years, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. The pain in her eyes mirrored the agony he felt in his soul. He had hoped for recognition, for some part of her to remember him, but now he saw how fragile this truth really was. "I know this is overwhelming," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't expect you to remember everything or to feel connected to me right away. But I needed you to know the truth. You've been living a life that wasn't yours, and it's time you knew who you really are." Emily looked away, her face pale, struggling to process what she had just heard. The silence between them stretched painfully, and Michael's heart ached with the fear that he had lost her all over again. After a long moment, she looked back at him, her voice barely a whisper. "How can you be sure? How do you know it's me?" Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo Paul had sent him, the one from when she had been found. He placed it on the counter in front of her, his hands trembling slightly as he did. "Look, this was taken when you were found. It's you. You were 7 years old, just like Emily was when she disappeared. The timeline fits. Everything matches." He swallowed hard. "Please, just take a look." Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking between the photo and Michael, but eventually, she reached out with trembling hands and picked up the picture. Her eyes scanned the image, and her expression softened, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. This was me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "Yes, it's you. You're my Emily." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she stared at the photo. Her mind grappling with the possibility that everything she had known about herself was a lie. She looked up at Michael, her voice trembling. "What do I do now?" Michael's heart ached for her. He knew this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "We take this one step at a time," he said softly. "You don't have to do anything right now. I just wanted you to know the truth. And whatever you choose from here, I'll be here for you. I've always been here for you." Emily nodded slowly, still holding the photo in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Michael's heart swelled with both grief and hope. He had finally found her, but the road ahead would be anything but easy. As they stood there in the quiet jewelry store, the weight of 18 lost years hung heavy between them. But for the first time in a very long time, Michael felt a flicker of hope, knowing that he had finally brought his daughter home. Lily's heart pounded as she sat alone on the park bench, the weight of everything Michael had told her pressing down on her like a heavy fog. She could barely breathe, her chest tight with confusion and fear. How could her entire life be a lie? She stared at the pendant, her fingers trembling as they traced its familiar outline. It had been a constant in her life, a symbol of comfort, given to her by the only mother she had ever known. And now, Michael was saying it was something else entirely, an artifact from a past she had no memory of. She couldn't process it. The idea that she wasn't Lily Matthews, but Emily Reynolds, a girl who had been stolen from her father. It was too much to bear. Her adopted parents had saved her, loved her, given her a life filled with care and stability. Could it really be possible that the truth had been hidden from her all these years? That her life had been built on lies? Tears welled up in her eyes as memories of her childhood flashed before her, the laughter, the warmth. The sense of safety her adopted parents had given her. They had been her world. They had told her she had been found, a lost little girl with no memory of where she came from. They had never lied to her before, had they? Why would they? Yet, Michael's words echoed in her mind, "You're my daughter. You were taken from me." The pain in his voice had been undeniable, and despite everything, she could feel the sincerity in his desperation. He believed what he was saying. He believed she was his Emily. Lily wiped her tears, staring up at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. How was she supposed to reconcile the life she had always known with the possibility that she belonged somewhere else, that she had another family? A father who had been searching for her for nearly 2 decades? Her thoughts raced back to Michael's final words, Samantha, your stepmother, she sent you away out of jealousy. Lily shook her head, trying to banish the thought. How could anyone do something so cruel? Her stepmother, the woman who had been part of her life, who had stood by Michael, had orchestrated this? It seemed impossible. But the fear in Michael's eyes, the way his voice had trembled when he said her name Emily, it all haunted her. Samantha. A woman Lily had never met, but one who had supposedly shaped the course of her life in ways she couldn't comprehend. She felt a fresh wave of tears prick her eyes as she thought about her adopted parents. What had they known? Had they truly saved her, or had they unknowingly become part of a larger lie? They had always been so kind, so loving. They were the only parents she had ever known. How could she even begin to confront them with this? Lily pressed her face into her hands, sobbing quietly. Her world had unraveled in just a few minutes inside that jewelry store, and now she didn't know where to turn or who to trust. After a long while, she took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. She couldn't run from this forever. She needed answers, and the only way to get them was to face the people who had raised her, who had been her family for as long as she could remember. If what Michael had said was true, if she really was Emily Reynolds, she had to know how it all had happened, how she had ended up in their care. Wiping her eyes, Lily made up her mind. She would go back home and talk to her parents. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The life she had always known was no longer enough, she needed to understand who she really was. With a heavy heart, she stood from the bench, her hand still clutching the pendant, the symbol of a past she was only just beginning to unravel. I'm Emily. How could you keep this from me? And flinched at the sharpness in Emily's voice, her face crumpling with pain. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to explain, her voice trembling. We didn't know, she whispered. We didn't know who you really were. When we found you, you were so lost, so scared. You didn't even know your own name. We just wanted to protect you. We loved you like you were ours. Emily's chest heaved with emotion, anger, and sorrow swirling inside her. Protect me? You kept me from my real family. You let me live my whole life not knowing who I really was. Anne's tears fell harder. I'm sorry. We thought it would be better this way. You were so young, and we were afraid of what the truth might do to you. We didn't want you to feel like you were abandoned, like you had been lost. Emily shook her head, disbelief and hurt overwhelming her. But I was lost. My father, he's been searching for me for 18 years. I've been missing all this time, and you never gave me the chance to find out. And sobbed quietly, reaching out toward her, but Emily pulled away, her heart racing. How could the people who had raised her, who had shown her love and care, have hidden something so important? Something that had defined her very existence? We thought we were doing the right thing, and pleaded. We thought we were giving you a fresh start, a life free from pain. We never wanted to hurt you. Emily stood there, shaking, her mind spinning. Everything she had known, her entire identity, was slipping away, unraveling with every word. She looked at the woman she had always called Mom, the woman who had taken her in, and felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and love. How could she reconcile the care she had been shown with the monumental lie that had shaped her life? You had no right to make that decision for me, she said, her voice low but full of emotion. You had no right to hide this from me. And nodded, her face a picture of grief and guilt. I know, she whispered. I know. And I'm so sorry, Emily. Hearing her birth name on Anne's lips felt like a punch to the gut. Emily turned away, unable to bear the weight of the moment. I need time, she said, her voice barely a whisper. and didn't try to stop her this time, simply nodding as fresh tears spilled from her eyes. "I understand," she murmured. Without another word, Emily turned and walked out the door, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Her whole life, she had been searching for something she couldn't name, a sense of belonging, a missing piece. Now, she knew why. She was Emily Reynolds, the daughter of a man who had never stopped searching for her. But the knowledge came with a heavy cost. The life she had known, the people she had trusted, had been built on a foundation of secrets. As she wandered down the street, her heart heavy, Emily touched the pendant around her neck. The one linked to a past she was only now beginning to remember. She had found part of the truth, but she knew the journey ahead would be long and painful. She needed to figure out who she really was, to piece together the fragments of her life that had been scattered across the years. And above all, she needed to confront the woman responsible for tearing her from her father, Samantha. The truth had been hidden for too long, and now, it was time for it to come to light. Emily's world had changed forever, but one thing was clear: she was no longer Lily Matthews. She was Emily Reynolds, and she was determined to reclaim her life, no matter the cost. Given her his trust, his heart, and she had destroyed everything. Michael took a deep breath, his chest tight with a bitter mix of anger and sorrow. He had spent years searching for Emily, years grieving the loss of his daughter, all while the truth had been right there, hidden by the woman he thought he loved. There was no coming back from this. "You can't make this right," Michael said coldly, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "You can't fix what you've done. Emily lost her childhood, I lost my daughter, and all because you were afraid I wouldn't love you enough." Samantha sobbed harder, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the bed. "I didn't know it would go this far," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. "I never imagined it would end like this." Michael's fists clenched at his sides as he struggled to maintain his composure. "You didn't think about the consequences, did you? You only thought about yourself, about how to erase my past so you could have me all to yourself." His words were laced with cold bitterness, the love he once had for her replaced by the deep chasm of betrayal. Samantha looked up at him through tear-filled eyes. "I was scared of losing you. I thought if Emily was gone, we could be happy, truly happy. I thought you would finally stop looking back at the life you had with Elizabeth." Michael felt a sharp pang in his chest at the mention of his first wife, but his resolve didn't waver. You can't erase someone's life like that. You can't just take away a person's history, their family, and expect everything to be okay. I would have never stopped loving Elizabeth or Emily. And now, I've lost them both in different ways because of you. Samantha collapsed back onto the bed, her sobs choking her words. "I'm sorry, Michael, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to make you see that." Michael stood in silence for a moment, watching her crumble under the weight of her actions, but he felt no desire to comfort her. "There's nothing left to say, Samantha. It's over. We're over." Her sobs quieted for a moment, and she looked up at him, wide-eyed and desperate. "Please, Michael, don't leave me. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can try to fix this. We can still be a family." He shook his head, his voice firm. "We'll never be a family again. You took that away when you took Emily. I'll never forgive you for that." Samantha's face crumpled, and she collapsed fully onto the bed, crying into her hands. Michael felt a wave of sadness wash over him, but it was not for her, it was for what he had lost. For the life that had been stolen from him and his daughter. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, the finality of his decision weighing heavily on him. The woman who had once been his partner, the one who had stood beside him during the hardest moments of his life, was now nothing more than a stranger. A stranger who had ripped his world apart. As he left the bedroom and walked down the hallway, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of loss. He had found Emily, but at what cost? Her entire life had been uprooted, and his had been torn apart by betrayal. Yet, one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let anything stand between him and his daughter again. He had lost too much already. Now, it was time to make sure that he didn't lose Emily all over again. With a deep breath, he closed the door behind him, leaving Samantha and the shattered remnants of their life together behind. He would face whatever came next, but he would do it with the knowledge that his daughter was still out there. And this time, he wouldn't let her slip away. Michael's voice hardened, the fury simmering just beneath the surface. I want him found. I want to hear him explain why he took part in destroying my life. Paul sighed on the other end of the line, but his tone was resolute. I'll keep digging. Just be ready for what you might find, Michael. It's never simple with people like Hale. Michael hung up the phone, his mind reeling. Samantha's betrayal had already shaken him to the core, but now it was clear that this went deeper. She hadn't just acted out of jealousy or insecurity, she had been coldly calculating. Working with someone like David Hale to ensure Emily never returned, to protect her claim to his fortune. It wasn't just his family that had been ripped apart, Samantha had also orchestrated this for greed, playing him for a fool all along. Michael stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. The rage he felt was overwhelming, but beneath that rage was an aching sadness. He had trusted Samantha with his life, with his heart, and she had used his grief to control him. And Emily, his daughter, had paid the highest price. She had been deprived of the life that was rightfully hers, exiled to a world where she had no memory of her real family. But now, Michael had found her. Emily was alive. And no matter what it took, he would set things right. He paced the room, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had spent so long feeling powerless, helpless in the face of his daughter's disappearance. But not anymore. Now he had a direction, a path forward. And he was determined to walk it, no matter the cost. As the night dragged on, Michael couldn't stop thinking about what Paul had uncovered. Samantha and Hale had conspired to erase Emily from his life, and the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Samantha had always been careful, always encouraging him to focus on the future, on their life together. She had subtly discouraged him from digging too deeply into Emily's disappearance, masking her actions with false sympathy. He could still remember her words from years ago, softly spoken but filled with hidden malice. * You have to let go, Michael. It's the only way to move on. * Now those words echoed in his mind, sickening him. She had never wanted him to move on for his own sake, only for hers. She wanted him to forget Emily so that she could secure everything, her position as his wife, and, most importantly, his fortune. Michael's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Paul. I've got something, Paul said, his voice filled with tension. Hale's in New York. Looks like he's been laying low, but I've got an address. Michael's pulse quickened. Send it to me. I'll take it from here. Be careful, Michael. This guy's dangerous, and you don't know what kind of people he might be connected with. I don't care, Michael said, his voice cold. I want to see him face to face. After Paul sent the address, Michael stood there for a moment, staring at his phone. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, it all collided within him, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this rest. Samantha had torn his family apart, and David Hale had helped her. Now it was time to get the truth, no matter the cost. As he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, Michael felt the weight of the past 18 years pressing down on him. But for the first time in a long time, he also felt a sense of purpose. He had been living in the dark for too long, and now, finally, he was going to get the answers he deserved. And when he did, no one, not Samantha, not David Hale, would be able to stop him from reclaiming the life that had been stolen from him and his daughter. Can take it one step at a time. I'm just so glad you're here, that you found your way back to me. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears, and she wiped at them quickly, as if embarrassed by her vulnerability. But I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been living a life as someone else. And now, everything I thought I knew is gone. Michael's heart ached as he watched her struggle. He had waited so long to find her, But he hadn't fully considered how overwhelming this truth would be for her. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly. "And I can't imagine how confusing it must feel. But no matter what, you're my daughter. That hasn't changed. It never will." Emily nodded, but the uncertainty in her eyes remained. She looked around the living room, her gaze briefly settling on family photos framed on the walls, pictures of a life she didn't remember. "This house. It doesn't feel familiar." "I thought maybe it would, but it doesn't," she admitted, her voice laced with frustration. "How can I be someone I don't even remember being?" Michael's throat tightened. "It's okay to feel that way," he said, trying to reassure her. "You don't have to remember everything right away. You don't have to force anything. We'll go at your pace, one day at a time." Emily stood there, looking lost. "I've always felt like something was missing, like a part of me wasn't whole. Now I know why." She paused, her voice trembling. "But that doesn't make it any easier." Michael stepped closer, careful not to overwhelm her, but wanting her to know she wasn't alone. "I can't imagine how hard this is for you. But I'm here, Emily. I've been here all these years, and I'll keep being here. You don't have to do this alone." Her eyes welled up again, and this time, she didn't try to hide her tears. "I don't know what to do next," she admitted. "Everything feels so uncertain." Michael's heart broke for her, for the daughter he had lost and the woman standing before him, so fragile and unsure of her place in the world. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said softly. "I'll help you. We'll figure it out together." Emily looked at him, her face a mixture of confusion, sorrow, and the faintest glimmer of hope. I don't know where to start," she whispered. Michael smiled gently. "You've already started," he said. "By coming here, by opening the door to this part of your life. That's the first step." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily stood there, processing everything that had come crashing down around her in the last few days. And Michael, though filled with relief that she had come to him, knew that this was just the beginning of a long, uncertain road ahead. But he didn't care how long it took, he had found his daughter, and that was all that mattered. "Would you like to sit down?" Michael asked, gesturing toward the couch. Emily hesitated, then nodded. She sat down, her movements slow and tentative, as if she were unsure of everything around her. Michael sat beside her, careful to give her space, but close enough to let her know he was there. For a long time, they sat in silence, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future hanging between them. But in that moment, for the first time in 18 years, Michael and Emily were together, and that was enough. "We'll get through this," Michael said quietly, his voice steady with conviction. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Emily glanced at him, her eyes filled with emotion she didn't yet know how to express. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she nodded, a small but significant step forward. And for Michael, that was everything. As she held a photo of Elizabeth, her eyes lingering on the woman she couldn't remember. Michael nodded, his voice soft with emotion. "She was," he said. "She had this way of making everything feel okay, no matter how hard things got. She would have loved to see the person you've become." Emily's lips trembled, and she looked away, blinking back tears. "I wish I could remember her. I wish I had more than just stories and pictures." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, the connection between them fragile but growing stronger with each moment. "You may not remember her," he said gently, "but she's a part of you. I see her in you every day, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you care about the people around you." Emily smiled weakly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I guess I just feel cheated, you know? Like so much of my life was taken from me, and I don't even know how to get it back." Michael's heart ached at her words. He had felt that same sense of loss for so long, and now he saw that Emily was grappling with it too, in her own way. "We can't get back the years we lost," he admitted, his voice tinged with sadness. "But we can make the most of the time we have now. We can start new memories, build something together. It won't be easy, but I'll be here every step of the way." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of what had been lost hanging heavy between them. But there was also something else, a flicker of hope, a sense that they could move forward, however slowly, and find their way back to each other. Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I want that too." As they continued looking through the old photos, the silence between them softened, the awkwardness slowly giving way to something more comfortable. Michael shared stories of Emily's childhood, of her love for animals, of the way she used to run to him with scraped knees and big questions about the world. Each memory seemed to spark a new connection, and though Emily still struggled to remember, she listened closely, as if trying to reclaim the pieces of her life that had been stolen from her. Hours passed, and eventually, they came to the end of the box, the last photo lying in Emily's lap. It was a picture of her as a young child, her face beaming with joy as she clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest. Michael smiled as he looked at the image, the memory flooding back to him. "You called that rabbit Mr. Floppy," he said with a laugh. "You wouldn't go anywhere without him. We even had to take him on vacation once because you refused to leave him behind." Emily stared at the photo, her fingers tracing the edges of the picture. I think I remember him," she said, her voice tentative, but hopeful. "It's not clear, but I feel like I know him." Michael's chest tightened with emotion. "That's a start," he said softly. "It doesn't matter how much or how little you remember. What matters is that we're here now, and we're figuring this out together." Emily looked up at him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty but also with a growing sense of determination. "I want to try," she said. "I don't know how long it will take, but I want to try to remember. I want to know who I am." Michael reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "We have all the time we need," he said, his voice steady. "And I'll be here, no matter what." In that moment, sitting together among the scattered memories of a life they had both lost, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. It wouldn't be easy rebuilding their relationship, navigating the pain of the past, but they had each other now. And that was a start. As the night drew to a close, Michael and Emily sat in quiet companionship, the distance between them slowly fading. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Michael felt like they were on the right path. Together. Been on your mind because she was such a big part of your life, even if you don't remember everything right now. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the pendant in her hands. "I want to feel connected to her," she whispered, "but I can't. I don't know how to make the memories come back, and it feels like I'm missing this huge part of myself." Michael felt the familiar ache in his chest. He wanted to take her pain away, to help her remember, but he knew that wasn't something he could force. "You don't have to force it, Emily," he said softly. "The memories might come in pieces, or they might not come at all. But that doesn't change the fact that she loved you, deeply. And so do I." Emily's eyes welled with tears, and she looked over at him, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid I'll never feel whole again." Michael's heart broke at her words, but he reached over, taking her hand in his. "You will, Emily. It's going to take time, but you'll find your way. And I'll be here with you every step of the way, no matter how long it takes." Emily gave him a small nod, her fingers tightening around his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Michael felt his chest swell with emotion. "You'll never have to find out," he promised. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the warmth of the fireplace flickering softly in the background. It was a peaceful silence, one that held the weight of everything unsaid but also the comfort of knowing they were no longer alone in this journey. Emily's voice broke the quiet, soft but filled with a kind of determination. "I think I want to visit her grave again," she said, looking over at him. "I didn't feel ready last time, but now I think I need to go back." Michael nodded, his heart swelling with pride and love. "Whenever you're ready," he said gently. "We'll go together." They shared a quiet look of understanding, the bond between them growing stronger with each shared moment. There was still a long road ahead, still so much they needed to process, but for the first time in years, Michael felt like they were healing, like they were slowly finding their way back to each other. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Michael continued their quiet routine. Each day a new step in the delicate dance of rebuilding their relationship. They revisited old memories, shared new ones, and slowly, the space between them began to close. There were still difficult days, moments when the weight of the past felt too heavy for either of them to bear. But through it all, they faced it together. And slowly, bit by bit, the life they had lost so long ago started to find its way back to them. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace again, Emily looked over at Michael, her expression soft but thoughtful. Do you think she's proud of me?" she asked, her voice tentative, but filled with a quiet hope. Michael's throat tightened, and he gave her a small, heartfelt smile. "I know she is," he said softly. "She loved you more than anything, and she'd be so proud of the woman you've become." Emily blinked back tears, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. "I hope so," she whispered. Michael reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "I know so," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. And in that moment, as the fire flickered softly beside them, Michael felt a peace settle over him. They had lost so much, but they had also found something precious each other. And as they continued to walk this uncertain road together, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. They were a family again, and that was all that mattered. The man as he was let out of the motel in handcuffs. David Hale looked older, more worn down than Michael had imagined, but there was no mistaking him. This was the man who had played a part in ripping his family apart, the man who had helped Samantha make Emily disappear. Hale's eyes briefly met Michael's, and for a moment, a flicker of recognition passed between them. Michael's heart pounded, anger surging inside him as he fought the urge to confront him right then and there. But he held back, knowing that this moment needed to be handled carefully. The truth was close, he just had to be patient a little longer. Paul placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. "You'll get your chance to talk to him soon," he said quietly. "We need to let the process play out first." Michael nodded, though his mind was already racing with questions. What would Hale say? Would he admit to everything? Would he reveal more than Michael already knew? And most of all, how deep did the conspiracy go? Later that day, after Hale had been processed and the initial interrogation was complete, Michael was finally given the opportunity to confront him. The small, sterile room where they were meeting felt suffocating, the weight of years of pain pressing down on Michael as he stepped inside. Hale sat at the table, his expression guarded, but there was no escaping the fact that he had been caught. Michael took a seat across from him, his hands clenched into fists as he tried to keep his composure. "You know who I am," Michael said, his voice low and steady. Hale's eyes flicked up to meet his. "Yeah, I know," he muttered. "You're the man who's been looking for his daughter." Michael's chest tightened with anger. "You're the man who helped take her from me." Hale shifted uncomfortably, but didn't respond right away. Michael leaned forward, his voice hard. "I want to know why. Why did you help Samantha do this? Why did you rip my daughter away from her family?" Hale sighed, his gaze dropping to the table. "It wasn't personal," he said quietly. "Samantha. She came to me, told me what she wanted. It was all about control. She didn't want Emily in the picture, didn't want you clinging to the past. She was afraid she'd lose you, and she was willing to do anything to keep her position safe." Michael's jaw clenched. "And you went along with it for money, didn't you?" Hale nodded, a hint of shame in his voice. "Yeah. She paid me well to make sure Emily disappeared, to make it so you'd never find her. I set up the whole thing, the fake records, the relocation. It was all done to make sure Emily would never come back." Michael's hands shook with fury. "You ruined our lives for money. You took my daughter's entire childhood away from her for Samantha's greed." Hale remained silent, but the weight of his actions hung heavy in the air. Michael's voice was thick with emotion. Do you have any idea what you've done to her? To me? You helped take away everything that mattered to me." For the first time, Hale looked directly at Michael, his expression softening just slightly. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. "I thought she'd be fine, that she'd grow up happy with her new family. I didn't know it would end like this." Michael's chest tightened, the rage and grief building inside him. "You had no right," he said, his voice shaking. "You had no right to make that decision for her, for me." Hale looked down again, his voice barely a whisper. "I know." The room fell into a heavy silence, the enormity of what had been done sinking in. Michael stared at Hale, trying to reconcile the man before him with the years of suffering he and Emily had endured. After a long pause, Michael stood up, his body trembling with emotion. "You'll pay for what you did," he said, his voice cold. "You took away my daughter's life. And now, you're going to face the consequences." Without waiting for a response, Michael turned and walked out of the room, leaving Hale behind. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on him, but there was also a sense of closure. Hale would be held accountable, and finally, the truth had been exposed. As he stepped outside into the fresh air, Michael felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had found the answers he'd been searching for, but nothing could undo the years that had been lost. Nothing could give Emily back the childhood she had missed, or the life that had been stolen from them both. But as he drove home, his thoughts turned to Emily, the daughter he had found after all these years. They had a long road ahead, but they had each other. And no matter what, Michael knew he would never let her go again. When he arrived home, Emily was sitting on the porch, her face calm but thoughtful as she looked out over the yard. She glanced up when she saw him, her eyes searching his for answers. "Did you find him?" she asked quietly. Michael nodded, walking over to sit beside her. "Yes," he said softly. "He's been arrested. It's over now." Emily looked down, her fingers fiddling with the pendant around her neck. "Does it make you feel better, knowing the truth?" Michael sighed, his heart heavy. "It gives me some closure," he admitted. "But it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give us back the time we lost." Emily nodded, her expression somber. "I don't think anything can." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging between them. But then Emily reached over, placing her hand gently on Michael's. "We can't change the past," she said quietly, echoing his own words from before. "But we can figure out where to go from here." Michael squeezed her hand, a sense of hope slowly creeping back into his heart. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll figure it out together." And as they sat there, side by side, Michael knew that no matter how hard the journey had been, they had finally found their way back to each other. And that was what mattered most. Was a brief flicker of fear in his eyes as Michael's voice echoed through the room. But the calm, calculated expression quickly returned to Hale's face, and he leaned back in his chair, as though none of it really mattered to him. "You act like this is personal," Hale said coolly, shrugging. "It was business, pure and simple. Samantha wanted your daughter gone, and I had the means to make it happen. Nothing more." Michael's fists clenched so tightly under the table that his knuckles turned white. The cold detachment with which Hale spoke made his blood boil. To Hale, Emily was just another job, a faceless, nameless task that paid well. But to Michael, Emily was his entire world, and hearing her life spoken about in such a dismissive way ripped him apart inside. Paul, sitting beside Michael, placed a hand on his arm, trying to steady him. "We're here for the truth, Michael," he said quietly, though the tension in his voice was clear. "Let him speak." Michael took a deep breath, fighting to keep his composure. He had waited so long for this moment, for answers, and losing control wouldn't help him get the closure he so desperately needed. "How did you keep her hidden?" Michael asked, his voice steadier now but still laced with anger. "How did you manage to make my daughter disappear for nearly 2 decades without leaving a trace?" Hale smirked, leaning forward slightly. "I have connections, Reynolds. I know people who can erase someone like that," he said, snapping his fingers for emphasis. "We changed her name, her records, everything. I made sure she was adopted by a family who wouldn't ask questions. After that, it was easy. No one came looking in the right places because we made sure there was nothing to find." Michael's stomach twisted. "So you knew she was out there this whole time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew she was living a lie, while I spent years grieving, thinking she was gone forever." Hale's eyes flickered with something, perhaps a flicker of guilt, or maybe just recognition of Michael's pain, but it was gone in an instant. "Like I said," Hale replied, his voice flat. "It wasn't personal." Michael's fists clenched again, but this time he didn't slam them on the table. He had learned enough about Hale to understand that no amount of shouting or fury would break through the man's cold, professional facade. Hale didn't care about the suffering he had caused. He had simply done his job, taken his payment, and moved on. Michael leaned in closer, his voice low and filled with restrained fury. "You may think this was just business, but you destroyed lives. You stole my daughter's childhood, her memories, her sense of who she is. You tore my family apart. And for what? A paycheck?" Hale didn't respond. He simply stared at Michael, his expression unreadable, as if waiting for the interrogation to end. Michael's voice shook with anger. "What you did isn't just going to go away. You're going to pay for what you did, and Samantha, she'll pay too." Hale finally spoke, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Samantha's already paying, isn't she? You left her. She lost everything. You've won, Reynolds." Michael shook his head. "This isn't about winning," he said. "This is about justice for my daughter." There was a long silence, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. Finally, Paul stood up, signaling that the interrogation was over. "You'll spend the rest of your life paying for what you did," Michael said quietly, his voice cold. "You may not care about the damage you caused, but I'll make sure the world knows what kind of man you are." As Hale was escorted out of the room, Michael sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The confrontation had left him shaken, and while he had gotten some of the answers he sought, it didn't feel like enough. The years of pain and loss couldn't be undone with a few cold admissions. Paul looked over at Michael. "You did what you needed to do," he said softly. "Now it's time to focus on moving forward." Michael nodded slowly, though the weight of everything still pressed down on him. Hale had finally been caught, and the truth had come to light. But now, the most important thing was helping Emily heal and rebuilding the life they had both lost. When Michael returned home later that evening, he found Emily sitting in the living room, her eyes scanning an old family photo album she had been looking through. She glanced up when he entered, her expression soft but full of questions. "Did you talk to him?" she asked quietly. Michael nodded, sitting down beside her. "I did. We know everything now." Emily hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the page in the album. Does it make you feel better?" Michael took a deep breath, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It gives me some closure," he said softly, "but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring back the time we lost." Emily nodded, her expression somber. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully understand what happened," she whispered, her voice shaking. "But I'm glad I have you now." Michael smiled gently, his heart swelling with love for his daughter. "We'll figure this out, Emily. One step at a time. We have each other now, and that's what matters." As they sat together, flipping through the pages of the old photo album, Michael felt a quiet sense of peace begin to settle over him. The past had been painful, but the future was theirs to rebuild. Together. And no matter how long it took, Michael knew they would find their way forward. Michael sat there, hand in hand with Emily, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past 18 years, and yet, for the first time, there was a flicker of hope. The answers he had sought, though painful, were now behind him. The man who had played a part in tearing his family apart was facing justice, and while that didn't erase the pain, it allowed a path forward. Emily, sitting beside him, was quiet but not distant. She had called him Dad, a simple word, but one that held so much meaning after all the years of separation. It was a step, a fragile but important one, toward the connection they had both longed for, even if they hadn't known how to ask for it. "I want to keep trying," Emily had said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Michael felt a swell of pride and love, emotions that had been dulled by the years of grief but were now coming alive again. She was willing to face the unknown, to rebuild not just her relationship with him but her sense of self, both as Emily and Lily. "We'll make new memories, starting right now," Michael had promised, and he meant it. The golden light of the sunset slowly faded, leaving them in the soft glow of dusk. Michael knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days when Emily would struggle, days when the past felt too heavy to bear, but he also knew they had each other. After everything they had lost, that was a gift in itself. "I don't know what normal is anymore," Emily had confessed, and Michael understood that feeling all too well. He, too, had been living in a state of limbo for years. Trapped between the man he had been before Emily disappeared and the man he became afterward. But now, they had the chance to define their own version of normal, to create a new life, one step at a time. "Normal doesn't mean going back to the way things were," he had told her. "It means finding a new way forward." And that was exactly what they would do together. As the evening deepened, Emily rested her head on Michael's shoulder, and a peaceful silence settled between them. The unspoken understanding, the love that had been lost but was now being rediscovered, hung in the air. They were no longer alone in their pain, no longer separated by the ghosts of the past. In the days that followed, they began to rebuild, slowly but surely. There were still hard moments, moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm them, but there were also moments of laughter, of quiet joy, of rediscovered connection. Emily continued to open up, sharing her fears and hopes, while Michael shared stories of their life before, helping her piece together a history she no longer remembered. The scars of the past would never fully fade, but with each passing day, they grew stronger together, healing in ways neither of them had thought possible. They visited old places, created new memories, and learned to embrace the idea that their family, though fractured, could still find wholeness in this new chapter. Sitting there on that porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Michael realized that while this wasn't the ending he had once envisioned, it was something even more valuable, a beginning. A chance to build something real, something lasting, with the daughter he had never stopped loving. As the last light disappeared and the stars began to dot the sky, Michael squeezed Emily's hand once more. "We'll be okay," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Emily nodded, her smile small but real, a promise of the future they would create together. For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were walking it side by side, and that was enough. They had each other, and with that, they could face whatever came next. The future stretched out before them, no longer filled with uncertainty and loss, but with the promise of new beginnings, of hope, and of healing. Together, they would move forward.